Good morning and welcome to our webinar entitled Resilience in Business. I'm one of the directors at Hopper Williams & Bell and Michaela Johns, and we act for owner-managed businesses and charities. This is our second webinar rather than our normal seminars, but given the current situation, we have turned to Teams and webinars. So, we have activated the questions on the right-hand side of your screen, so you can interact with us at least a little. Please type in your questions, and what we have agreed with Paul is that we will answer these at the end of his talk to us today, so that we can keep the flow going. And if we've not dealt with any by the time our time is up, we will send them to you with a link at the end. I saw Paul speak at an event at the Aegeus Bowl probably a year or two ago now, and felt that what I heard then would be useful to you as clients and business people. We're of course in a slightly different world today, and I hope you enjoyed today's talk as much as I did when I heard him face to face. So a little introduction about Paul. Following his 20-year military career, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Kinkaid will extract 7 approaches that will afford you the competitive advantage in business, the same competitive advantage that he achieved over his adversaries while serving. Paul's talk will ensure you're in a position to lead your people in a way that they respond to, and how leading from a position of care is an unexpected trait for a military man. I'll hand the mic over to Paul now, and I hope you enjoy it and are inspired.
Morning, thanks Michaela, that's really good of you, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. So the talk is entitled somewhat secretively, and there's not many secrets in here. Much of it is common sense, but it's been extracted, as you say, from a 20-year career whereby I've done everything that you might imagine a soldier to do, plus a few extra little bits as well, I imagine. I've travelled to 44 countries in 20 years, 5 continents, and led soldiers on each one of those. But perhaps more importantly is I've seen leadership all over the world from all different cultures, and it's been fascinating to watch how different leadership traits impact people in different ways. And so the leadership secrets that I'm going to share today are partly of my own observation and things from my own leadership experience, but also observing people all over the world, which has been a real privilege, I have to say. So those are the 7 secrets there, which we're going to go through one at a time, and each one's got a little slide associated with it. And if there's a story to go along, then I might throw one of those in as well, and we'll see where we go. So let's make a start. The first one really is have the will to lead. You know, in the UK, in business, all over the world in business, we see people promoted all the time through either time in post, longevity, or technical ability. You know, the best computer programmer becomes the head of the programming department, but that individual doesn't have the will to lead. They might be very, very good at their job, but as soon as we put them into a position of leadership, they don't want to be there. Equally, we occasionally still, unfortunately, see people who promote in order to get the car parking space or the bigger office or the salary. You know, let's be perfectly honest, get the additional salary. But with that salary, the car parking space, the bigger office, the title, comes with the responsibility to lead others. And we have to have a will to do that. And the little quote on the screen there is my view of one of the differences between managers and leaders. So in seniority, lots of people manage well and work within those constraints, but the job of a leader is to push boundaries and push constraints and exploit those freedoms as well. So, you know, one of the questions coming out of this really is, are you a leader or a manager? Now, some of us have to flick-flack between the two, and that's normal. But in terms of leadership, what do we do? How do we push those boundaries slightly? How do we get the best of our people? And I would suggest, coming into the second secret now, that one of those ways, and the central tenet of my business, is that leadership, good leadership, great leadership, comes from a position of care. Now, you might not expect that from a 6'5" ex-commando colonel type chap, but if I don't care about my soldiers way back when, and I don't care about my clients now, then I'm not going to be able to get the best for them. And equally, when those individuals have got problems and challenges, they're not going to come to me to air those problems and challenges if I don't care about them. There were days in service when well, not even days, during my service, the teams I commanded, I loved those soldiers, men, women, obviously in an entirely appropriate way, but it was a deep-seated love for them. And the quote again you see there from Roosevelt: "No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care." That's a truism. That's an absolute truism, and we need to demonstrate that we care about people by demonstrating an interest in them and all sorts of things. But I think what's key to bring out here is that care doesn't mean being the leader that people want all of the time. Sometimes we need to tell someone they're not promoting because, frankly, they don't have the skill set to do that. And that's done from a position of care. There's a book called Radical Candor by Kim Scott, and she talks about how to give honest, radical, candorous feedback. Candorous? I think I might have just made that word up. Candid feedback through a position of care, and give that feedback directly as well. So there's many times, and you will have all faced it as well, whereby you need to be the person that those around you need rather than those around you want. Sometimes people will come up with ideas and you need to just adopt a command and control approach. Very rarely, I have to say, and that might surprise you from an ex-military man as well, very rarely does command and control work. We need to get involvement of people around us, and that's where the care comes from. But let's extend that care out to families, loved ones. If we know that someone's partner is unwell, then we need to extend that care. So one of the big things for me and people that I talk to, my clients, my friends, colleagues, is that if I can look at myself in the mirror at the end of the day and know that all the decisions I've made have been for the right reason and done from a position of care for the best of those around me, then I'm going to be a happy guy. And some of the sharper-eyed people out there might look at the other quote in green: "Don't allow the I can't even speak today, my apologies. Don't allow the relentless pursuit of excellence overshadow your compassion for your people." Let's not thrash people to death because we need to care about them. Now, the sharper-eyed will notice that one of the three values of my business at the bottom, generosity, empathy, excellence, seems to ride in conflict of that. And you might be right, but there's nothing wrong with pursuing excellence, but from a position of care, not only for those around us, but also for ourselves. Self-care is not selfish. We are no good to those people around us if we thrash ourselves to death, burn out, and just become stressed, anxious, and that angry person in the office. So self-care is a real key aspect of this. Next one is adopt the commando mindset, which is outlined in the box at the bottom there. The commando mindset is taught to all Royal Marine Commandos and Army Commandos, and it becomes that mindset that you approach everything with. And who wouldn't want that in their business space? Be the first to understand, first to adapt and respond, and the first to overcome. So what do we need to understand? Well, the business brain jumps in immediately. We need to understand the market around us. We need to understand what the future market might do, what the market conditions, how much market share, what our clients want from us. But let's go back to the last slide as well, that care thing. We need to be the first to understand our people, because if we don't understand our people and the stresses and anxieties and freedoms that they've got and ambition that they have, then we can't lead them in an appropriate way. We're leading the way we want to lead rather than the way they need to be led from a position of care. So that's what we need to do. We need to be the first to understand. And some of the better clients that I've been dealing with through this COVID challenging time, they've been doing their own scientific assessment and looking at the rate of change, the R curve, which we're all horribly familiar with now, and we're seeing it increase again now. But trying to understand when that peak will happen and when they can start launching back into the marketplace. So that allows us to adapt quickly, respond quickly, ahead of our competitors quite often, or adversaries in old school, my old school certainly. And then we can overcome these challenges really, really quickly, and think much more broadly about the challenges that we're facing. And if we're the first to overcome, then market share goes up, we start to become more competitive for our clients. And you can see how that adopts itself. So the commando mindset is really important, I think, in business as well. And I'll say it again at the bottom of the screen there. Who in business would not want to be the first to understand, the first to adapt and respond, and the first to overcome? There are lots of things that sit beneath this, of course, and a couple of those will come out later in another slide. So I'll move on to that now. And this is that slide. It's a little bit austere, I'm afraid. It's quite bright after the last camouflage, watery one. But red teaming. Red teaming is an approach applied by the military, and it really encourages, in a yellow box there, contrarian thinking, that sort of devil's advocacy element of not wanting to pull things apart, but just ask those difficult questions. We have existed for a long time in a VUCA world, and VUCA means volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. That's a military term from the end of the Cold War, but it's been adopted by business since the early 90s. And we do exist in that VUCA space. But right now, during the challenge of COVID, we're seeing all four of those elements be presented to us. And that is incredibly unusual. Normally, we have 1, 2, possibly 3 elements of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. But we're seeing all four at the moment. And so because we're in that crisis mindset, we really need to encourage that contrarian thinking. Everybody has a view. It's not senior leadership's monopoly to have good ideas. So we need to listen to the person at the back of the room who is being loyally opposed. That in the bottom corner, the white box, loyal opposition, is a key thing to encourage as well. That's not to say, anyone who says no is not necessarily a dissenter. Many people, say, oh, you might want to try this, that, and the other. I remember, on a patrol in a jungle environment, I suggested as the commander that we might do a certain route that took us quite high up in the hills. But there was a risk that we were going to skyline ourselves and demonstrate our silhouette, present our silhouette to the forces that were, our enemy, essentially. And one of the soldiers, very new soldier actually, so I was there with sort of 15 years experience. This guy had about 15 months experience, and just pointed out to me that there was a risk we might silhouette ourselves to the enemy against the skyline. Now, some people might look at that as insubordinate. I was giving the orders as a military man, and he questioned them and actually suggested contrarily that we shouldn't do that. And he was absolutely right. And we then changed the route in. We used the valleys instead, which brought other challenges. Water predominantly sits in the bottom of a valley, so it was pretty wet. But we managed to get in all the same, and it all went off fine with no challenges really. A key aspect of red teaming is what I do a great deal is actively consider failure up front. Through active consideration of failure, we can build a much more robust plan. We can mitigate against those challenges that we might face that are likely to result in failure, and build contingency plans. So many of you will be familiar with a risk template of impact versus likelihood. And you get this sliding scale of low impact, high likelihood, and you score things in that way. And many of you will be familiar with that. Well, through the process of what we call a pre-mortem analysis, i.e. what will be the cause of death or failure, rather than post-mortem, what was the cause, we can look at the things that might make us fail. So one of the top questions to ask is, in 12 months' time, we've launched this new product, this new service, the plan has been implemented for 12 months, and we've failed catastrophically. Our names are dirt, Our shareholders have run a mile, and we're never going to be in business again. It's failed that badly. What has made us fail? What's come along and tripped us over? And by considering those up front, we can mitigate against that in our plan. It's such an incredibly powerful tool that people don't imagine the worst case to be the worst case. We're far too optimistic. We need to be a bit more grumpy, I think. So the active consideration of failure allows us to build a much stronger plan, whereby we can mitigate against those controllable actions that we look at, and we can put contingency plans in against the uncontrollables, which sit on a shelf somewhere until the conditions are right. COVID-19, for example, a global pandemic comes along, totally uncontrollable for us, and yet we pull off that folder from the shelf or from the electronically email it to people, and everyone then knows what to do, because we considered that up front when we actively considered failure. And I know from my perspective and my history, and you will all know as well, wouldn't it be much better to have constructive dissent than destructive consent? That's where we brief people in a room and they all nod sagely and go, yes, good idea, boss. Leave the room and go, I haven't got a clue what he's talking about. That is never going to work. And we may all have been there at some point or other, but wouldn't it be better to be in the room and someone say, actually, I'm not entirely sure that's going to work for the following reasons, and I make the following suggestions. That's sort of intent-based leadership. So I think there are times to be a devil's advocate, and there are times to point out when things might not work, but those are not all the time. And we know that there are people out there who are less loyal and just keen on destabilising the plan. And it's our job as leaders to identify when the intent is for the right reason or the wrong reason and address those accordingly. So that's red teaming, and that's something we do a great deal with clients, especially now when we're trying to recover from crisis and work out what the hell we're going to do next. Okay, this is another military thing. They're surprising, isn't it? 20 years in the army, and I'm coming up with lots of military things. Employee mission command. Well, mission command is what it says on the left-hand side of the screen there. The ability to express your intent through an inspirational, because we want people to get out of bed in the morning and come to work. That inspires them. Or perhaps nowadays not come to work, just get out of bed and work. A transparent story. Sorry, I missed aspirational. Aspirational because stretch challenges are worth celebrating. You know, no one really celebrates walking around the block, whereas finishing a 5K race or 10K race, because it's more challenging, is worth celebrating, and we appreciate the medal. Getting a medal for getting up and walking around the block, well, a bit cheesy really, isn't it? So aspirational because we want to stretch people and we want to achieve, we want to grow, we want the bottom line to get better, we want productivity to go up, and we want profit to go up, don't we? Let's be perfectly honest, that's what this is about, is getting more money, more bang for our buck, and leading better. And there's lots of statistics, shall I say that again, statistics that prove good leadership enhances employee engagement. Better employee engagement can lead to up to 20% increases in productivity, up to 20% increase in profit, up to 143% increase in share prices. Staff turnover goes down, staff turnover, not financial turnover. Well-being goes up. I mean, why wouldn't we want to lead our people well when those figures are coming out at the bottom? Finally, the transparency of the story is important, because if I know that in 3 weeks' time I can be the star of the show because my department needs to support the rest of the organisation, I'm in the spotlight at that point, I'm the hero, well, then I'm going to work hard for those people who are in the spotlight before then, because I want my opportunity. And because those people have supported me, I'm going to carry on supporting them when it's their opportunity as well. And the really important part here is the unifying purpose. We've heard people like Simon Sinek talk about why, and purpose is really important. But in the military, every mission is given a title, a task, and the unifying purpose. And that's always identified by the prefix in order to. You are going to do this in order to, or in order that. The organisation can be, have the biggest market share, or the organisation can do whatever. And that means everyone understands the why. Everyone knows what they're doing. And on the right there, if everyone understands the why, they can exercise initiative. then they don't keep coming to you, knocking on your door as the leader to get you to approve their decisions, because you trust them and you allow them to do that. So mission command is that thing on the right, really, telling everybody what to do, not how to do it, what you want them to achieve, which then supports the unifying purpose. So if you employ mission command in your organisation, you'll have a lot of organisations, a lot of departments, a lot of individuals working towards that one single unifying purpose. And if they know the direction they're travelling, the decisions they make will be within the boundaries in order to achieve that end state, that desired end state, the outcome, whatever you want to call it, the purpose. And then their decisions are much more likely to align to the direction and guidance and advice you would have given anyway. So there's less knocks on the door. Everyone becomes more productive. Otherwise, you start to creep into micromanagement terrain, and that's a really bad thing. Then people start leaving organisations. Okay, so that's mission command. Let's move on to this. Some people might recognise the chap on the right there. Some of you might not do. For those who don't, his name's next to him. It's General James Mad Dog Mattis, United States Marine Corps, latterly became the US Secretary of State for Defence, and infamously or famously resigned for clashes against our friend Mr. Trump. He uses the quote there on the left hand side. So fighting for communications, fight for comms, is very, very important in the military. If you go to an isolated location and you don't have comms back to the support elements, you're isolated, you're on your own. Or, to use business terms, you're not able to collaborate and work collectively and mutually achieve things. So he would challenge all of his commanders, and I was fortunate enough to work under his command, quite a long way under his command, not directly with him, but it was known across his command. What do I know? Who needs to know it? And have I told them? And if the answer to the bottom one is no, well, the follow-up question is why not, and when am I going to tell them? Knowledge is not power. Knowledge is there to be shared in order that everyone can grow for the good and benefit of the organisation. If we share knowledge and share transparently through the organisation, then the red teaming elements can come in. If everybody across the whole organisation knows what the unifying purpose is, then they can raise their hand and say, I've had a great idea that might get us there quicker, cheaper, more effectively, collaborate with someone else in the market to offer a better product, better service. So it's really important to share information. I have to say, a lot of times I see at very senior levels that attitude of knowledge still is power. And if I share what I know in the boardroom, for example, then Bob or Sarah might be better at my job than I am, and therefore I'm not going to share that information. And that's a really sad state of affairs, to be perfectly honest. So I would really encourage you to take on James Mattis's line of what do I know, who needs to know it, have I told them? And the answer to the second question, it's okay sometimes for that to be no one. What do I know? Lots of stuff. Who needs to know it? Well, no one needs to know it, and that's okay. Or no one needs to know it yet because it's not sufficiently mature enough information to be able to pass on. Okay, this is the last one, the last of the 7. Always a little further. Now, many of you out there will be familiar with the Special Air Service, the SAS, and you'll be familiar with their motto of who dares wins. What you won't be familiar with is this is sort of an informal motto, if you like, of the Special Air Service, always a little further. And it's inscribed on a clock tower within their regimental lines. Members of the Special Air Service, the soldiers, often refer to each other as pilgrim. And it comes from this poem, The Golden Road to Samarkand, by James Elroy Flecker. And Samarkand is in the picture behind him. You may have seen Joanna Lumley during lockdown. She's done some TV programs. She went there. She visited Samarkand. And this is a mosque, a mortuary mosque as well, designed by a very famous architect in that region. And it's actually in Uzbekistan now. Samarkand is in Uzbekistan. But the line from the poem, we are the pilgrims, master, we shall go always a little further. Isn't that beautiful? we should always go a little bit further for those around us. We can always do a little bit more. Now, of course, coming from a position of care, let's reflect back on what I said earlier. Self-care is not selfish. We need to be very careful with this always a little further, because if we employ this incorrectly, then we end up burning ourselves out and we go too far. So there's a health check associated with this one. But too many times we have said, I have said, and I've seen other people say, no, I don't have the time right now. Actually, we probably do, just to have 30 seconds with someone. So I do a lot of coaching, and one of the things I do is a 30-second coach. Clients phone me up, I'm stuck on this thing, great, okay. And we'll do that 30-second and unlock them in that 30 seconds or a minute, or if it's a challenging time, then we do a quick coach, which is a 15-minute thing. But there's always a little further. You can always help those around you. You can offer advice. And some of you who know me will know that the strapline for my business is be the leader others turn to. Well, this goes hand in hand with that. Leadership is not top down. Leadership goes out to our peers, our colleagues at the same level, if you like, in the organisation and outside the organisation, and up. We can always go a little further for one another. It doesn't matter how tired and exhausted we are, you can probably still put one foot in front of the other. And that comes back to the military side of, you know, if we are in a sticky situation, you're not going to get tired and just stop. You need to keep going. If we overlay that into business and it's a sticky situation now, we can go a little further on the previous 6 slides. We can show a little bit more care. We can show a little bit more empathy. We can utilise our emotional intelligence to understand that when we're in a heightened anxiety or high stress state, how we impact those around us. And we don't want to be leaving negative traces on people around us, especially now. So during the challenging time that we're facing, we need to be much more people-centric than profit-centric. Of course, profit is important, yes. I'm not suggesting we don't look at that, but we need to be much more people-centric, because I guarantee you, and I've got the stats to back it up, if we look after our people then look after our clients, and clients then spend the money. So to do everything from a position of care, challenge our own thinking up front through red teaming, share that information when we know it, who needs to know it, and have we told them is critically important. And then that gives us much more space, because we're employing mission command and people are just routinely doing good business towards the end state. That allows us to adopt the commando mindset, that first element of being the first to understand, because we as leaders have got more headspace. We're not dealing with micromanagement, we're not dealing with trivia, we're looking into the future, horizon scanning, thinking strategically, planning a long way out, and that allows us to go always a little further for our troops, for our soldiers, for our people that work with us, next to us and above us. And that's an aspect of leadership lots of people lose sight of, is that upward leadership. Our bosses are just humans. That's all they are. If they fall over and graze their knee, they're still going to bleed red, regardless of what you might think of them. And so we need to look after them as well. And so if we've got spare capacity and the boss is stressing out, what's wrong with knocking on the door or walking in if it's an open plan area, saying, do you know what, I've got a bit of spare capacity. What can I do to help? That leadership from a position of care is 360 degrees. And with that, I'll end there and see if there are any questions. I think we rattled through that quite quickly, actually.
Great, thank you, Paul. Yeah, just a reminder to everybody that the questions are there to put up if you want, but I do have a few. If I could put 2 or 3 to you now, Paul. The first one is, do you think that COVID is clearly showing those leaders that demonstrate the care they have for their people and families?
I'm going to say yes and no. I'll go to the no bit first. Some people are so anxious that they've lost sight that they're a leader at the moment, and so they're focusing in on themselves and the immediate ground around them. That might be because they're new to leadership, or they don't have the will to lead, perhaps. The yes bit is very, very obvious and very clear that a lot of people are still focused on the bottom line, on profit, and are frankly thrashing members of staff during a time at which anxiety, the background anxiety for everyone is sitting at around a 6 or something on a sliding scale at the moment. And it's so easy to push people over the limit. So in short, the no bit is for those inexperienced leaders who haven't got the experience of stepping out and leading in crisis. So they've gone inward, and we see that sometimes, and they might not be suited to leadership in the future. But the majority is yes, I would agree that we are seeing leaders who are focused on the wrong things at the moment. And a good leader knows when to focus on their people wholly rather than the mission, if you like. And now is that time to focus on our people, especially now that second wave is coming. The first one was disappointing and frustrating. This one, because we've already felt the pain of it, is going to hurt even more. So we need to be ready for it and really look after our people.
Thank you. The next one is, what one thing do you wish you'd done differently in your career?
Wow, that's a good one. Do you know what? I got an injury at one point in my career, and it was a serious injury. I broke my back, and I didn't really ever get back into my physical training in the way at which I would have liked. Now that might sound strange, it might not sound at all leadershipy, until I allow you into the insight that if I'm not as fit as I want to be, or as fit as I feel I should be, I'm quite grumpy, and it impacts every area of my life. So, if I'm not as fit as I should be, my anxiety levels, or my grumpiness, if you like, sits at a heightened state. So it doesn't take much to get me into a higher grumpy state. I'm probably oversharing here. But that's the biggest thing. I made decisions that resulted in people dying, and I wouldn't make those decisions in any other way. Now, do I regret those? Yes, I do regret the loss of life. Of course I do, on a daily basis. But the biggest thing I would change would be I would go back to that time when I was in recovery from breaking my back, and rather than just recovering, I would have pushed the physical training and become much fitter again, because that freed up my mind, it freed up lots of different things, and would stop me being a grumpy bear.
I think as accountants we probably all understand that grumpiness it comes to us often as well. One more question that's come from the floor. Do business leaders need their accountants to always play the role for which they are traditionally famous, i.e. actively considering failure? Is this the approach that makes them the trusted advisor? Do you have an opinion on that?
I think there's an element of that. Yeah, we all owe it to each other to be that slightly devil's advocate, that, let's actively consider failure. Where might this go wrong up front? Because then the plan will be stronger. But I don't think accountants need to always play that. But I wouldn't have my accountant if they were always reminding me where I might fail. That would be a really, I call those people cloud hunters. If people are constantly looking for where they might fail, we've lost sight of the silver lining, and we're constantly trying to search for the cloud that goes with it. So I think there's an element of, yes, we need to be realistic in our assessment of what might result in failure. We also need to be realistic in making our assumptions, because we make assumptions about all sorts of things. But if we don't validate those assumptions, it just becomes a list of things that we wish to be true, and therefore we blindly plan against them. So no is the short answer. I don't think that accountants should be pessimistically pointing out failure all the time. They should point out where there are opportunities as well, and say, if you did this, you'd get a bigger return, you'd pay less tax. Wouldn't that be great? Or did you know that there's a certain grant available, or a fund that you might be able to, be open to? So I would want my accountant, and he does, to point out opportunities that I might not be aware of, because that's why I pay the money, for the expert to give me expert advice, both to stop me tripping over and grazing my knee, but also opening doors for me to make the opportunities and make sense of the freedoms that are out there and exploit them.
One final question then Paul. What one action did you take as a leader that had the biggest effect in your opinion?
Asking for help. Lots of people role play leadership. They get a leadership appointment and they think they need to be strong and know all the answers and give direction and be very in that sort of, I'm the boss, and we role play. It's a natural thing for people to do. But actually, vulnerability is a really important aspect of leadership. The ability to ask for help, know that we don't know everything, and say that to people around us. Because, I'm not suggesting we be weak, but we be vulnerable. And there is a very fine line between the two. So the biggest thing I ever did, and it took me a few years, to be honest, to drop the ego and open up to things that I didn't know. The biggest thing I did was ask for help. And I've learned that lesson again in business since leaving the military, because obviously I don't come from a business background. I had a lot to learn. And I've asked for help, and mentors have stepped up and have helped me tremendously. So that's the biggest thing. It might be unexpected for whoever asked the question, but the biggest thing a leader can do, I think, is also ask for help, because that vicariously gives those around us permission to do the same, which is put their hand up and ask for help. And isn't that important?
Great, Paul. Thank you very much for your words of wisdom. I really do hope that everyone listening today has managed to take away at least 1 or 2 points that they will consider further. And then by also taking this time out today and reflecting, I hope it all brings positive results to your organisations. So do take a look at our website event page for any future seminars or webinars that we put on. And if there are any specific requests that you want, then please do email us in and we'll try and arrange it for you. I hope you have all a good week. And again, thanks goes to Paul for his inspiring talk today. Thanks to you all and goodbye.